What's up? Today we are talking about different types of livestock identification. Mainly because when I bought cattle tags earrings for myself, I've always read something like more than just a number. And I thought that it should be addressed because if you are mad about the equivalent of like social security number earrings for cows, then let's fix that. Also, I figured this would be a lighter way to start my videos before hitting up something like AI or farrowing crates. So, there are lots of different types of ID methods, and they are separated into two separate categories, temporary and permanent ID. In our temporary ID, we have things like your ear tags, brisket tags, paint brands, neck chains, leg and wing bands, and your grease crayons or aerosol paint. While in permanent ID, we see things like tattoos, ear notches, breeze and hot brands, microchips, face and color markings, and nose prints. So let's back up a second to why we use ID. There are 5 main reasons that we're going to be using identification on our livestock animals: medication treatments, reproduction records, performance data, track ownership, and track disease outbreaks. Let's start with medication treatments. We need to know who got what medication at what time because of this thing called withdrawal times. Withdrawal time is the amount of time that it takes for an animal from when it was given medication to when it can be used again for its meat or milk. So, example of when we use identification for this reason be if we are running animals through a chute, like our beef cows, we'll spray them with some paint or rub them up with a crayon so we know who has been vaccinated. Or if we have sick animals, we're going to put them down in our treatment book. We're going to say this animal got this treatment on this date and the withdrawal time is this date. Next up, let's talk about our reproduction records. When an animal is bred, then we have a parturition date. Parturition date is the date that they give birth, which is a wonderful day. So we have a nice little calendar to tell us they were bred on X day and will give birth on day Y. And this also lets us know who to keep and who to cull, because we want to keep the animals that reproduce and we need to cull the animals that do not. As a quick side note, cull does not necessarily mean kill, it just means remove from the herd. Next up, let's talk about performance data. We are looking at our genetic improvements. These are your EPDs, your EBVs, and your PTAs. We like genetic improvements. Genetic improvements mean more milk, more muscle, more awesomeness, and we also breed out those bad things like the spider gene in lambs, or mastitis in cows, or the halothane gene in pigs, because they are not a good time for us or the animal. Let's move on over to tracking ownership. For starters, we have purebred livestock out in the world, of course, so they have their own breed association and herd book, and we have to track all that stuff. So also accidental mixing of herds. We don't want that, and if herds get mixed, then we know whose cow is whose. Also, theft. We like to know whose cow belongs to who if someone decides to cattle rustle. Last but certainly not least, we have disease outbreaks. We can see where the animals have been and when they were there, and this helps us control outbreaks, such as the avian influenza outbreak that happened fairly recently. We can also test animals and track the tested animals. Animals like sheep tend to get scrapey ID tags saying, hey, this animal was tested and it's clear, no scrapey here. And birds, very similar thing with avian influenza. Get tagged for it, all clear. So some other facts while we're here talking about ID. Let's talk about branding for a sec. So our 3 main types of branding are freeze branding, hot branding, and paint branding. Freeze branding is one of the more common ones as it only damages the hair and is fairly painless and a lot less stressful on the animal, and there's no damage to the hide. The only thing is it cannot be used on white cattle, but most cattle are black anyway, so it's fine. Up next, let's talk about hot branding, typically used as a farmer group ID. I mean, you can do that with freeze branding too, but hot branding is also an option. We use it less often because it does damage the hide, but it is easy to read, it's easy to find your stolen animals, and it does work on white cattle. So if you have white cattle, then... And then we have paint branding, which is temporary. It is a good way to mark your cattle when you need some quick ID, know who to call when the next truck comes around, know who to vaccinate and who's been vaccinated during vaccination season, and you can match up the moms to the babies. It's very helpful for those things. So some helpful hints about ID in general. We do not put neck chains on beef cattle, just not a thing. Neck chains are for dairy cows. We don't do microchips in slaughter animals because can you imagine the PR disaster of someone cutting into a roast and finding a microchip? That'd be a nightmare. And also, we do not do wing bands on slaughter poultry because it can damage the wing, and we sell the wing, and if it is damaged, we cannot sell it, and that's no money. So let's close up by talking about RFID tags. These are special ID tags, radio frequency identification. So these allow information about the animal to be stored into the computer, goes right from the tag to the computer. This will tell you things like your average daily gain, how much the animal is eating or moving, location of the animal, health data, and some more stuff. They are very useful tags. So to close off, I would first like to give credit to my animal husbandry teacher from my undergrad because I basically ripped all this information straight from his identification lecture. Yep, I had my slides open while I was writing the script. I changed the order, but yeah, I ripped all the information from his slides. Credit where credit is due. Personal opinions, I am completely fine with ID. I think it is great, and I think it is important for each farmer to know what works for their farms. I tend to go through animal rights activist websites to research topics covered, and honestly, ID is not really a topic people hate that much, with the exception of ear notching in pigs, but I'm going to cover that on a later day. And I just want to make a more lighthearted video where I can just talk about ID and be a little salty that whenever I look for ear tags to match my children, I have to see stuff like that, and I just roll my eyes. But yeah, anyways, please make your own informed decisions. Those are just the words of some random ag girl on the internet. Bye.